Wow, what a beautiful and normal day at Robert Thirsk High School.
Hello, welcome to Billy's Cooking News. This is your favorite host, Anna. And today we're going to be looking at the experiment of Jane Elliott, who conducted a controversial experiment exploring the impact of discrimination has on human behavior. Come with me. Today we have a guest. So Elliot, can you tell me a bit more about the historical context of the experiment? Like what gave you the idea of conducting experiments on racism and human behavior?
Of course I can do that. Well, you see, I decided to do this experiment after Black rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. died. I wanted my students to see the impacts of discrimination and favoritism and see what effects it has on people and children and the effects of human behavior.
And what type of study would you define this as?
I would define the study as a naturalistic observation because in observing student behavior before experiment and during the experiment, it is classified as a naturalistic study. And it is also a case study because it studies an in-depth investigation to how children react to racism as well as correlation between racism and human behavior.
I see, but many people are curious. What exactly is the goal of the experiment? People find this experiment cruel to white children because it causes them psychological damage.
Well, you see, the goal of this experiment was to see how discrimination can impact one's psychological state and confidence, especially how third graders may react to it. To help her all, and also to help my all-white students understand what racial discrimination feels like from a very young age.
And what was the methodology involved in this experiment?
So I wanted to show my students what discrimination feels like, and in order to do that, I first divided my class by eye color, so that those with blue eyes and those with brown. And on the first day, I told the blue-eyed children that they were smarter, nicer, neater, and better than those with brown eyes. Throughout the day, I praised them and allowed them privileges, while in contrast, the brown-eyed children I told them to wear collars around their necks, and that their behaviors and performance were criticized and ridiculed. On the next day, I reversed the roles, which allowed other students to see the contrasting treatment based on their characteristics. This demonstrated that even though children turned on each other, and they often fight and argue and sometimes hit each other because they're children, this time they were motivated by eye color.
And finally, what was the finding and conclusion that resulted from the observations in this experiment?
Well, after this experiment, the students started to internalize and accept the characteristics that they had been arbitrarily assigned based on the color of their eyes given at birth. They began hating and despising the other group because they got the benefits, while they suffered and received hate and abuse.
Thank you so much.
No problemo.
What is that?
I'm wondering.
So what were the findings and conclusions? Well, let me tell you all about it. Vamonos. Well, you see, the students were quick to accept and internalize the characteristics they were assigned based on the color of their eyes. The superior group immediately wielded their dominance. The latter group would fall into the role of the inferior. This would cause a large dispute between the two groups, a large amount of hatred due to the benefits one received and the others lacked. The students started to internalize and accept the characteristics they've been assigned based on the colors of their eyes. They had hatred and despised the other group because they got the benefits, while they suffered and received hate and abuse.
How could this study be applied to modern society?
We see, it is without a doubt that racism is still very prevalent in our society. This experiment showcased the ways of discrimination and the impact it has on people. It showed the frustration and hatred people can feel towards each other, as well as division within our society between people and their differences. This experiment can still be applied in a more ethical manner due to the fact of how abundant racism still is. There's a large amount of ignorance people hold when it comes to race, and that is one of the main issues why racism is a problem we are facing to this day. Showcasing injustices and the struggles people deal with due to discrimination is extremely important. Through experiments like the blue eye/brown eye experiment, it can provide further education in our society today within the topic of racism. This experiment showcases the ways discrimination cannot affect just people around the world, but as well as youth, and how this discrimination leads to further aggression and hatred to the opposing side, as well as division between people and their differences.
Hello.
Hello, Mother! You're home!
I am home.
How was the Jane Elliott experiment, Askins?
It was very, very interesting and a little bit traumatic.
Oh, well, I was wondering, was it worth it? Did the good outweigh the bad? In your humble opinion, is the knowledge gained from unethical psychological experiments good enough to forego personal well-being and health? Should psychologists be given free rein in experiments or adhere to strict moral codes?
The experiment did in fact show the behavioral difference between the two groups when they were treated a certain way. This goes to show that there was knowledge gained from this specific psychological experiment, even though it wasn't entirely ethical. We believe that it was worth educating the children on discrimination and that it did effectively do so. However, we also believe that there are many different ways the topic could be. Though this experiment, children were psychologically damaged due to the fact that they were pitted against one another, there are ways to educate without having to physically put a child through something. Since the children who Elliot did her experiment on were so young, that means they were easily influenceable, and the impression this experiment did on them could have heavily stuck with them. Overall, we believe the good did not entirely outweigh the bad, because there is always a more ethical and fair alternative. The well-being of a child should not be disregarded or put aside temporarily just to teach a lesson, regardless of what is being taught. Psychologists are equal to those who are participating. They should not have free reign and any power over willing participants. This could not only cause a lot of physical harm, but mental too. There are experiments that could be entirely unethical, but if a psychologist had the ability to do anything, then ethical experiments would most likely be conducted. We believe that psychologists should all adhere to some moral code in order to avoid any damage at all to any participants. A psychologist needs to maintain things like fairness, professionalism, responsibility, benefits to both sides, along with many other when conducting an experiment.
There is no doubt that there can be a large struggle with morality when it comes to conducting experiments. There are so many justifications that can be made for seemingly unethical methods. For example, Elliot justified her doings by saying, "You think that's traumatizing, and try living the way for a lifetime." This, however, does not mean psychologists should not adhere to some moral obligations. We think that justification is not the only thing that validates an experiment. Moral codes such as informed consent, debriefing, and etc. must always be implemented when a psychologist is conducting an experiment.
Goodbye! Thank you for watching! Goodbye! Thank you for watching! Thank you for watching!